down in the valley again, this low place in the canyons. If you shouted at sea level, there's a chance that you would not hear an echo. But you shout up against these walls, you're going to hear echoes. Because valleys are home to many different things. They're home to tight places, they're home to serpents, and they are home to echoes. You've been in those places where when you cry out to God, the skies seem like brass above you. There are echoes of desperate cries all around you. Early Americans called these kind of places hollows because there's something hollow and empty when you go through a low place. You hear the echo of your own voice, but that pales in comparison to the many echoes that you will hear in a low point of unjust accusations. Paul said there are a multitude of voices in the land, and the loudest voices of them all seems to be those who make unjust accusations. Welcome to today's session on combating unjust accusations. Our study guide for this series is a book that I wrote entitled The Point of Low Point, a study on the struggles in Joseph's life, those low points where we don't want to stay long, because if we stay in the valleys too long, they can begin to define us and not refine us as they were meant to do. Maybe some of what you've read, heard, and discussed in this series is going to help you and leave you better and not bitter. If betrayal is a deep wound, then unjust accusations are like salt in those wounds. Joseph experienced this at Potiphar's house. You know the story. He was serving in Potiphar's house. He gradually rose up in rank until he was over the entire household. Everything Potiphar had was his, save Mrs. Potiphar. Mrs. Potiphar was not satisfied with that and tempted Joseph daily. He resisted the temptation, saying, "How can I sin against God? Before a law was chiseled in stone, thou shalt not commit adultery." It was in Joseph's heart to stay away from things that were inappropriate and wrong in the sight of God. And you know the story. Finally, one day they were in the house alone, and she approached him. He ran, left his coat in her hand, and she concocted a story that was built upon one lie after another. And soon the echoes of unjust accusations filled Potiphar's house and then filled all of Egypt. Have you ever been there? From the most popular in town to the town drunk or pariah, from the cover of People magazine one week to Farm and Tractor the next week. This world is so fickle. It shifts blame left and right. It's as old as the garden. You remember what Cain asked God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The shifting of blame. Rudyard Kipling once said, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, then you are truly a man. Because spiritual maturity is when you can retain your integrity, when others are losing their integrity and blaming it all on you. We always want to know the why. We always look for the motivation of it all. But in some way, why do people do this? Because they perceive that that lie benefits them, that they will look better if you and I will look worse. In Bunyan's allegorical work, Vanity Fair was filled with all of the pleasures of the flesh, all of the pride and the selfishness of this world. And I think it points to something, that unjust accusations are motivated by some form of vanity or by selfishness. Potiphar's wife felt humiliated. She felt bad, and she wanted Joseph to feel bad, and so she blamed it all on him. And others soon began to parrot the lie. Voices high, low, loud, soft, young, old. And you know the old game that we used to play. As you tell one person something and they pass it along, it changes, it morphs, it gets exaggerated from person to person. Here's something to consider. For each and every truth, there are many lies. If you look at the book of 1 Kings in chapter 18, you see that. Elijah faced off against 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. The odds were 850 to 1. 850 false to 1 true. Go forward a few chapters to 1 Kings 22, and Jehoshaphat heard 400 different false prophets. And finally, Micaiah came and told him what he should do. Unjust accusations spread farther. Lies fly halfway around the world before truth can get its boots on. Why is that? Because our fallen flesh believes lies more easily than we believe the truth. No one spoke up for Joseph. Truth has fewer allies than lies. Truth remains silent, while unjust accusations just echo and resonate and reverberate. It is no wonder Satan is called the accuser of the brethren. And when the lies begin, the decibel level can get so loud and so persuasive and pervasive until many will believe the lie. Solomon said that there are 7 things God hates. The 6th thing is the person who bears a false witness. The 7th thing is the one who sows discord amongst the brethren. It is the accuser's work to divide us, to separate us. This is what happens in the low point. The multitude of voices begin to separate us from the truth. Why does God, in all of his goodness and compassion, allow this? What is the point of the low point of unjust accusations? Simply put, it's to form character within us, to teach us to distrust the multitude of voices, and to train our ear and our spirits to hear his voice. We must discern that voice above all of that of the maddening crowd. Elijah's success at Carmel that I mentioned a moment ago, a very short prayer brought the power of God onto that mountaintop. But pretty soon he exited the mountaintop and he was down in a valley. And the fearless one grows very fearful. You know how he journeyed 40 days at the instruction of the angel. And when he got to the mount of God and he came out of the cave at the bidding of God, then the winds began to rock that mountain. But somehow Elijah perceived that it was not in the loud, blustery sound of the wind, that God could not be found there. Then the earth began to quake and the whole mountain began to shake, and Elijah discovered God was not in that. Fire blanketed the mountain. But Elijah perceived in his spirit that God was not in that either. So you had wind, you had the earthquake, you had the fire, 3 momentous things that happened. But Elijah said, God's not in that. And then he heard the still small voice of God, or as one translation says, the whisper of God. The world shouts and God whispers. Lies demand attention, but truth does not. The world echoes, and it verses the cooing of the dove, which is the Spirit of God. That wisdom that James said is from above, pure and peaceable. Lies, those impurities, they make for war, but the truth makes for peace. This is the point of the low point, that God will form character in us when people are lying about us, if we can learn to hear his voice. The whisper of God is like oil poured on troubled waters. Truth spoken in love is one of the most powerful forces you can experience when you're in a low point. Ever wonder what happened to Mrs. Potiphar? Her story ends in Scripture with this lie. I would say that others who unjustly accuse, they have a short story. Their story ends when lies begin. If you can hold your peace, remain true to your calling and your conviction, no lie can stop you. It's like the tumbleweeds that blow across a Texas plain. They come sweeping through. They make a loud noise and a great appearance, but soon they're blown away with the wind. Rest assured that God has his eye on you. What is our posture? Our posture is that of Joseph, the Jesus of the Old Testament. We don't read that Joseph responded to the lies. As the suffering Messiah, pictured in Isaiah, like a sheep before his shearers, he was dumb. He opened not his mouth. There are times when we can correct misunderstandings for those who innocently accuse us, but for those who are willingly wicked, no suitable explanation will do. For in the warehouse of lies, there are a limitless supply of falsehoods. So just be silent, turn it over to God, and God will watch out for you as he did Joseph. All things, truth and lies, work together for the good to them that are called according to the purpose. So let this experience improve you. Don't get bitter, get better. Leanne Womack, in the song where a woman is giving advice to her daughter, and I hope you dance, she said these words, "Don't let some hell-bent soul leave you bitter." I guess you've got to ask, who controls your life? The liar, the accuser, or the one who is called the way, the truth, and the life? You're going to get out of this valley in time, but you'll only exit when you tune out the static of unjust accusations and tune in to the whisper of God. There is a point in this low point as we combat unjust accusations.